I remember the moment like it had just happened. The kitchen was dimly lit, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence between words. My name's Lena. I'm 32, and at this point, I'm not sure how my life has spiraled into this. I was sitting at the small round table I'd picked out with such excitement 5 years ago when Sam and I first moved in together. Back then, it felt like the start of something magical, a promise we'd silently made to each other without fully understanding what it would mean. My sister Mia sat across from me, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug as she waited for me to speak. She always had this way of looking at me, like she could see through every wall I tried to put up. So, she pressed gently, her tone careful but insistent. What's really going on, Lena? You've been dodging this conversation for months. I exhaled slowly, staring at the faint scratch on the table's surface. It was from one of our first arguments, a clumsy slam of a plate during a tense breakfast. I used to think the scratch gave the table character. Now it just felt like a scar. I don't know, Mia, I started, my voice barely audible. I mean, I know, but I don't know how to say it. You don't know how to say what? She asked, leaning closer. Her concern was palpable, but there was an edge to her voice, like she already suspected the answer but wanted to hear it from me. I swallowed hard, my throat tightening. The words felt like acid on my tongue, but they had been simmering for too long. I think I regret marrying him, I finally admitted. The confession hit the air like a thunderclap, reverberating in the silence that followed. Mia blinked, her mouth slightly open as if forming a response, but she said nothing. For a moment, I thought maybe she hadn't heard me, and I almost wished she hadn't. But then her brows furrowed, and she leaned back in her chair, the weight of my words sinking in. Lena, she said, her voice softer now. What happened? I thought you and Sam were, I don't know, solid. At least, that's how you always made it seem. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. Solid? Maybe at first. But lately, God, Mia, it's like I don't even know who I am anymore. Who we are. I feel like I've been trying so hard to hold everything together that I've completely lost myself in the process. Mia's eyes narrowed slightly, her protective instincts kicking in. Has he done something? Is he... She hesitated, her voice dropping. Is he treating you badly? I shook my head quickly, guilt bubbling up in my chest. No, it's not like that. He's not a bad person. He's kind and patient, and he loves me. I know he does, but... My voice broke, and I looked away, unable to meet her gaze. It's like we're on two completely different wavelengths. We want different things. We see the world differently. And every time I try to talk to him about it, it's like I'm speaking a language he doesn't understand. Mia was quiet, for a moment, her fingers still tracing the rim of her mug. So, what are you saying, Lena? Do you think you made a mistake? I sighed, my chest feeling heavy. I don't know, maybe. It's not like I don't love him, because I do. But sometimes I wonder if love is enough, you know? Like, what if I married him because it felt safe, not because it felt... right? The words hung in the air between us, and for a brief moment, I felt a strange sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted just by saying them out loud. But then, before Mia could respond, there was a sound, a faint creak from the hallway behind me. My heart stopped. Slowly, I turned, dread curling in my stomach like a cold fist. Sam stood there, his face pale and expressionless, his keys in, his hand. I hadn't heard the front door open. How long had he been standing there? Long enough, I realized with a sinking feeling, as his eyes met mine, and I saw the unmistakable pain in them. Lena, he said, his voice low and steady, but there was a rawness to it that cut through me. I didn't mean to. He trailed, off, shaking his head slightly. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the door. "Sam, wait!" I called out, my voice rising in panic as I scrambled to my feet. But he didn't stop. The door opened, then closed, and I was left standing there in stunned silence, the sound of his departure echoing in my ears. Mia stood up, her face pale. "Lena," she said urgently, placing a hand on my arm. "You need to go after him." But I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of lead, and my mind was racing, replaying every word I'd just said. What had I done? What? Had he heard? And more importantly, was there any way to fix it? The door's echo lingered longer than it should have, or maybe it was just my heart, pounding so hard it felt like it filled the room. Mia's grip on my arm tightened, shaking me out of my stupor. "Lena, snap out of it," she urged, her voice sharp but panicked. "He just walked out. Go after him." I shook my head, a lump rising in my throat. I don't even know what I'd say. What am I supposed to do, Mia? Tell him I didn't mean it? But I did. My voice cracked, and tears blurred my vision. I just didn't mean for him to hear it. Mia's eyes softened slightly, though the urgency didn't leave her face. "It doesn't matter if he heard something you didn't mean for him to. He heard it, Lena. And right now, he's out there thinking you don't want him anymore." She paused, her voice dropping lower. "Is that true? Do you want him to leave?" Her question hit me like a punch to the gut. My chest tightened as I tried to sort through the tangled mess of emotions inside me. Did I want him to leave? No. But did I regret some of the choices I'd made? Yes. And that contradiction was crushing me. "I don't know," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I don't know what I want anymore." Mia sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Lena, you've got to figure it out fast. Because if you wait too long..." She stopped herself, shaking her head. "Never mind, just go. Now." But I still couldn't move. My legs remained glued to the floor, my mind spinning with all the moments that had led up to this. The way Sam used to make me laugh until my sides hurt. The way he'd kiss my forehead before leaving for work, even when we'd argued the night before. The way he'd held my hand so tightly at my dad's funeral, as though he were trying to absorb my grief into his own body. And then there were the cracks. The silences that stretched too long. The arguments that circled the same unresolved issues. The growing sense that we were living parallel lives rather than sharing one. I sank back into the chair, burying my face in my hands. "What if it's too late, Mia?" I murmured. "What if I already ruined everything?" Mia crouched beside me, her tone softening. "It's not too late, Lena. But you can't just sit here and let this spiral out of control. He needs to hear from you, your real feelings, not just what he overheard." I looked up at her, my eyes filled with uncertainty. "And what if my real feelings don't fix anything? What if they just make it worse?" Mia hesitated, then reached for her phone and shoved it into my hands. "Call him," she said firmly. "At least try. If he doesn't pick up, we'll figure out the next step." "But you can't just sit here and do nothing." My hands trembled as I stared at the phone. The thought of hearing his voice, angry, hurt, or even worse, indifferent, terrified me. But Mia was right. Doing nothing wasn't an option. I dialed his number, each ring feeling like an eternity. Then, just as I was about to hang up, his voicemail picked up. "Hey, it's Sam. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." The beep sounded like a gavel slamming down, sentencing me to silence. I froze, unable to find the words. Finally, I muttered, "Sam, it's me. Please call me back. I just need to talk to you. I ended the call, my heart sinking as I realized how inadequate my message sounded. Mia gave me a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. "It's a start," she said. "But don't stop there. Do you have any idea where he might have gone?" I thought for a moment, my mind sifting through possibilities. Sam wasn't the type to go to a bar or crash at a friend's place. He valued his space too much. Then it hit me. Our old spot by the lake. It was where he'd proposed to me, where we'd had some of our most honest conversations. "I think I know where he is," I said, standing abruptly. "Then go," Mia urged. I grabbed my coat and keys, my legs moving on autopilot even though my mind still felt paralyzed with fear. The drive to the lake felt surreal, like I was floating outside my own body. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as memories flooded my mind. Sam's laughter echoing across the water. The way he'd looked at me when he slid the ring onto my finger. His voice trembling as he said, "You're my everything, Lena." And now, I wasn't sure if I was still his everything, or if I wanted to be. When I arrived, the parking lot was nearly empty. The lake was shrouded in darkness, save for the faint glow of the moon reflecting off the water. My heart raced as I scanned the area, searching for any sign of him. And then I saw him. He was sitting on the bench near the edge of the water, his shoulders slumped and his head bowed. He looked so small, so defeated, that it broke something inside me. "Sam," I called softly as I approached, my voice trembling. He didn't look up. His voice was low and steady, but it carried a weight that made my chest ache. "Did you come to tell me you meant it?" I stopped in my tracks, his words slicing through me like a blade. "No," I said quickly. "I came to explain. To tell you I didn't mean it the way it sounded." Finally, he turned to face me. How could I explain something I barely understood myself? I stood there, frozen, the chill from the lake's breeze seeping into my skin. Sam's eyes bored into mine, not with anger, but with something far worse. Pain. He had always been composed, the kind of man who kept his emotions in check. But now there was a rawness to him I'd never seen before. And it was my fault. "Sam," I began, my voice trembling. "It's not what you think." His lips pressed into a thin line, and he let out a humorless laugh. "Not what I think? Lena, I heard you. I heard you tell Mia that you regret marrying me. How am I supposed to interpret that?" I took a hesitant step closer, my arms wrapping around myself as if that could shield me from the weight of his words. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's complicated." Sam shook his head, his gaze shifting to the dark water in front of him. "Complicated," he repeated bitterly. "That's what people say when they don't want to take responsibility for how they feel. So tell me, Lena, what's so complicated about regretting marrying me?" My chest tightened, and tears welled up in my eyes. "It's not about you," I said desperately. "Or at least, not entirely. I've been feeling lost, Sam. Like I've been drowning in everything. Our life, my own expectations, the pressure to be perfect. I've been questioning everything, not just us. Me too." He finally looked at me again, his brows furrowed. "You've been feeling like this for how long?" he asked quietly. I hesitated. "A while," I admitted. "But I didn't know how to talk to you about it. Every time I tried, it felt like I was failing you, failing us." Sam's expression softened for a brief moment, before hardening again. "So instead of talking to me, you told Mia, and now here we are. You get to feel better for admitting it, and I'm the one who has to walk around carrying it." His words hit me like a slap, and I took another step forward, my hands shaking. "You're right," I said, my voice cracking. "You're absolutely right. I should have told you. I should have trusted you enough to have that conversation. But Sam, you've been so distant lately. Every time I tried to talk, it felt like you were shutting me out." His jaw clenched, and for a moment, he didn't respond. Then, he said quietly, "I wasn't shutting you out. I was trying to hold things together because I could feel us slipping. And I didn't know how to stop it." His voice wavered, and he looked away again. "But hearing you say you regret marrying me, that's not something I can just shake off, Lena. That's not something you can take back." "I know," I said quickly, stepping closer until I was standing just a few feet away. "I know I can't take it back, and I'm not asking you to forget it. But please, Sam, let me explain. I didn't mean it the way it came out. I don't regret loving you. I don't regret the life we've built. But I've been struggling with the weight of everything, and in that moment, I let it out wrong. I said something I shouldn't have." He stayed silent, his expression unreadable, and I felt panic rising in my chest. "Please," I pleaded, my voice breaking. "Don't let this be the end of us." For a long moment he didn't move. Then he stood up slowly, shoving his hands into his jacket pockets. "You know what hurts the most?" he said quietly. "It's not the words themselves. It's that you've been feeling this way for so long, and I had no idea. You didn't trust me enough to let me in." I opened my mouth to respond, but he held up a hand, stopping me. "I need time, Lena. I need time to figure out what this means for me. For us. Because right now, I don't know." My heart sank, but I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Okay," I said softly. "I understand." He stepped past me, his shoulder brushing mine, and I resisted the urge to reach out and grab his hand. As he walked away, his figure fading, into the darkness, I felt the weight of his words settle heavily on my chest. He needed time. But what if time wasn't enough? What if I'd already lost him? I stood there for a while, staring at the lake, replaying everything that had happened. The guilt was suffocating, but beneath it was a flicker of something else, determination. If there was even the slightest chance of repairing what we had, I had to try. I owed him that. I owed us that. When I finally returned to my car, the tears came in full force. I sat there gripping the steering wheel as sobs racked my body. For the first time in a long time, I let myself feel everything. Every ounce of fear, regret, and love. It was overwhelming, but I knew it was necessary. I couldn't move forward until I faced the truth of the silence was deafening, the kind that settled into the walls and pressed down on my chest. Every corner seemed to echo with memories. Our laughter, our arguments, the quiet moments in between when it felt like the world was just the two of us. And now, it was just me. I hung my coat on the hook by the door, staring at the empty spot where Sam's jacket usually hung. The sight of it missing felt like a punch to the gut, a physical reminder of what I had just done. I sat down on the couch, my legs giving out beneath me. The coffee table still held remnants of our life together. A stray magazine, his favorite mug, the coaster he insisted on using even when I told him it didn't matter. How had we gone from that to this? How had I let things get so broken? The phone on the table buzzed, pulling me out of my thoughts. For a brief, foolish second, I thought it might be Sam. My heart leapt as I grabbed it, but the screen only showed a message from Mia. "Did you find him?" I stared at the words, unsure of how to respond. Finally, I typed back, "I found him, but I don't think it helped." Her reply came almost immediately. "What do you mean? What happened?" I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the screen. How could I put into words the mess I had made? The way Sam had looked at me, like he didn't recognize me anymore, like I had become someone he didn't know if he could trust. He said he needs time, I typed finally. I think I might have really lost him this time. Mia's response came quickly. Lena, don't give up. Time doesn't mean it's over. It means he's processing. Let him. But you need to figure out what you're going to do too. Her words struck a chord, and I set the phone down, leaning back against the couch. What was I going to do? For months, I had been living in a haze, drowning in doubts and fears I couldn't articulate. I had let those feelings fester until they spilled out in the worst possible way. And now, I was standing on the edge of losing the one person who had always been my anchor. I closed my eyes, letting the memories wash over me. Our first date, when he'd shown up with flowers, even though I'd told him I hated cliches. The way he'd stayed up all night with me when my mother was in this hospital, holding my hand and telling me everything would be okay. The way he'd looked at me on our wedding day. His eyes filled with so much love, it had taken my breath away. But there were other memories too. The fights about money, about work, about the future. The nights we went to bed angry, backs turned to each other. The feeling of growing further and further apart, even as we shared the same space. It wasn't that I didn't love him. I did. But love hadn't been enough to bridge the widening gap between us. And now I wasn't sure if it ever could be. I sat up, wiping my eyes and taking a deep breath. Mia was right. I couldn't give up. Not yet. But I also couldn't keep pretending that everything would magically fix itself. If I wanted to save my marriage, I had to start by confronting the truths I had been avoiding for so long. I grabbed a notebook from the coffee table, flipping to a blank page. My hand trembled as I picked up a pen and began to write. Why do I feel this way? The question stared back at me, stark and unrelenting. For a moment, I didn't know how to answer it. But then the words started to flow, hesitant at first, then faster and faster as I let everything spill out. I feel trapped. Not because of him, but because of me. Because I've built this life around an idea of who I'm supposed to be, and I don't know if that person is really me. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what I want. And I'm scared. Scared that I'm not enough. Scared that I'll never be enough. For him. For anyone. Even for myself. The tears came again. But this time, I let them. They felt different now, less like a weight and more like a release. I kept writing, pouring out every fear, every doubt, every regret. It was messy and raw, but it was honest. For the first time in a long time, I was being honest, with myself, if not with Sam. When I finally put the pen down, the page was covered in jagged handwriting, smudged with tears. I stared at it, my chest rising and falling with deep, shaky breaths. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't even a plan. But it was a start. The phone buzzed again, and I glanced at it, expecting another message from Mia. But it wasn't her. It was an unknown number. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something compelled me to pick it up. "Hello?" I said, my voice hoarse from crying. "Lena." Sam's voice came through the line, quiet but steady. "Can we talk?" My heart leapt, a mixture of relief and anxiety flooding through me. "Yes," I said quickly, almost tripping over the word. "Yes, of course." There was a pause, and then he said, as I headed back out into the night, my heart pounded with a mix of hope and fear. This wasn't going to be easy. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. The lake looked different this time. The air was colder, the stillness heavier, and the moonlight seemed dimmer. I parked and stepped out, the crunch of gravel under my boots loud in the quiet night. Sam was sitting on the same bench, his figure outlined against the dark water, I hesitated, gripping the notebook I'd brought with me like a lifeline. I wasn't sure why I'd grabbed it. Maybe it was because I needed something to hold on to. Something that felt tangible and real amidst all the uncertainty. He didn't turn around as I approached, and I wondered if he'd heard me. Then, just as I was about to speak, he said, "You came back." His voice was soft, almost resigned. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, one laced with quiet expectation. "I said I would," I replied, my voice barely louder than the whisper of the breeze. He nodded, but didn't look at me. "I wasn't sure if you'd actually come." I stepped closer, sitting down on the bench beside him. There was enough space between us to feel like an ocean, and I hated it. But I didn't know how to bridge it, not yet. "I meant it," I said after a long silence. "I meant it when I said I want to fix this." Sam let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Fix it? Lena, this isn't a broken chair or a leaky faucet. This is us. And I don't even know if we're still fixable." The words stung, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I opened the notebook, flipping to the page I'd filled earlier. "You're right," I said quietly. "I don't know if we're fixable either. But I've been doing a lot of thinking tonight, and there are things I need to say. Things I should have said a long time ago." He finally turned to look at me, his expression wary but curious. "Like what?" I took a deep breath, my fingers trembling as I traced the edge of the page. "Like how scared I've been," I began. "Not just of losing you, but of losing myself. I've been so wrapped up in trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect partner, that I forgot how to just be me. And in the process, I think I started resenting the life we've built. Not because of anything you did, but because I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of my own expectations." He was silent, his gaze fixed on me as I spoke. I couldn't tell what he was thinking, and it made my stomach churn. "I said I regretted marrying you," I continued, my voice cracking. "But that wasn't true. I don't regret loving you. I don't regret the years we've spent together. What I regret is not being honest with you, not trusting you enough to share how I was feeling before it got to this point." Sam's jaw tightened, and he looked away, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "So, why now?" he asked. "Why are you telling me all of this now, when the damage is already done?" "Because I'm scared of losing you," I said simply. "Because I love you, and I don't want to give up on us without trying to make things right, and because you deserve the truth, even if it's messy and painful." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared out at the water, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched between us, heavy and oppressive, until I couldn't take it anymore. "Sam," I said softly, reaching out to touch his arm. He flinched but didn't pull away. "Please, talk to me." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what to say, Lena," he admitted. "I've been trying to wrap my head around everything. What you said, how you've been feeling, and I don't know. I feel like I've failed you." "You haven't," I said quickly. "This isn't your fault, Sam. It's mine. I let my fears and doubts get the better of me, and I didn't give you a chance to help me work through them. But I want to change that. I want to be better. For you. For us." He looked at me then, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and longing. "Do you really think we can come back from this?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I want to try, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make that happen." For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then finally he nodded, a faint glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Okay," he said quietly. Let's try. Relief washed over me, and I felt the tension in my chest ease for the first time in what felt like forever. It wasn't a resolution, it wasn't a promise that everything would be okay, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. We sat there together. Every word felt like it would either shatter the fragile truce we'd reached or cement the distance that remained. When we pulled into the driveway, Sam cut the engine and sat back in his seat, staring at the darkened house. It felt strange to see it through his eyes, as though I were a guest in my own life. "You coming in?" I asked softly, hesitant. He nodded, opening the door without a word. I followed him inside, the quiet between us stretching again. The air inside the house felt colder than usual, like it had absorbed the tension and uncertainty from earlier. Sam went straight to the living room, sitting on the couch with a heavy sigh. I stood in the doorway, unsure of what to do with myself. The notebook was still clutched in my hands, its weight a reminder of everything I had said and everything I hadn't. I finally moved to sit in the armchair across from him, setting the notebook on the coffee table between us. He noticed it immediately, his gaze lingering on it before shifting back to me. "You wrote all that down," he said, his voice low but even. "I had to," I admitted. It was the only way I could make sense of everything I've been feeling. And, even then, I don't think I got it all right. He nodded slowly, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Can I read it?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't expected him to ask, not yet anyway. My first instinct was to say no, to keep those words private until I felt ready. But then I realized that if I truly wanted to rebuild what we had, I couldn't keep hiding. "Okay," I said, sliding the notebook across the table toward him. Sam hesitated for a moment before picking it up. He opened it to the first page, his eyes scanning the lines I had poured onto the paper earlier. The room was so silent that I could hear the faint rustle of the pages as he turned them, each sound like a heartbeat echoing in the stillness. I watched his face carefully, searching for any sign of what he might be thinking. His expression remained unreadable, his brow furrowed in concentration. At one point, he paused, his eyes lingering on a particular section. I wanted to ask him what it was, but I held my tongue, letting him process it in his own time. When he finally closed the notebook and set it back on the table, he leaned back, exhaling deeply. "That was a lot," he said finally, his voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "I know," I said softly. "It's messy and raw, but it's the truth. At least as much of it as I could put into words." He nodded, rubbing a hand over his face. "I didn't realize how much you've been carrying," he admitted. "I mean, I knew something was off. I could feel it. But I didn't know it was this deep." "It's not your fault," I said quickly. "I should have told you sooner. I should have trusted you enough to share what I was feeling before it got this bad." He shook his head. "No, Lena, I'm not blameless in this. I've been distant too. I've been so focused on trying to hold everything together that I didn't notice how much you were struggling. And when I did notice, I didn't know how to help." "You didn't know because I didn't let you," I said, my voice breaking. "I shut you out, Sam. I let my fears and doubts take over, and I didn't give you a chance to be there for me." He looked at me then, his eyes filled with a mix of pain and determination. "So where do we go from here?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with uncertainty. I didn't have an answer, not a clear one anyway. But I knew we couldn't keep doing what we had been. "I think we need to start over," I said, finally. "Not erase what we've been through, but rebuild from where we are now. Be honest with each other, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." He nodded slowly. "That makes sense." But it's not going to be easy, Lena. I know, I said. But I'm willing to try, if you are. He was quiet for a moment, then reached across the table, his hand resting on top of mine. I'm willing, he said softly. I don't want to lose you either. A lump rose in my throat, and I squeezed his hand tightly. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't a promise that everything would be perfect from here on out, but it was enough. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a flicker of hope. The days that followed felt like walking through a minefield. Every conversation, every glance, every shared moment seemed fraught with unspoken tension. But there was also something else. Something fragile and tentative, like the first rays of sunlight after a long, stormy night. Sam and I were trying. That much was clear. But trying didn't mean everything was suddenly better. The wounds were still fresh, the doubt still lingering in the corners of my mind. And yet, there was a sense of purpose now, a mutual understanding that we both wanted to fight for what we had nearly lost. We short walks around the neighborhood in the evenings, our conversations halting but genuine. It wasn't much, but it was a start. One evening, as we sat on the couch, Sam cleared his throat. There's something I've been thinking about, he said, his voice careful. I looked at him, my heart skipping a beat. What is it? I think we should talk to someone, he said. A therapist. Together. The suggestion caught me off guard, and for a moment I didn't know how to respond. A therapist? I repeated, as if testing the word. Yeah, he said. I've been reading about couples who go through rough patches like this, and a lot of them said therapy helped. I think it could help us too. I hesitated, the idea both daunting and strangely comforting. The thought of laying everything bare in front of a stranger made my stomach churn, but at the same time, I knew we couldn't do this alone. Okay, I said finally. I think that's a good idea. Relief flickered across his face, and he nodded. I'll look into it. See if I can find someone who's a good fit. It felt like another step forward, another piece of the foundation we were trying to rebuild. And for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could make it work. The following week, Sam found a therapist, and we scheduled our first session. The night before, I could barely sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of what I might say, what he might say, and what the therapist might ask. When we arrived at the office, the room was warm and inviting, with soft lighting and comfortable chairs. The therapist, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, introduced herself as Dr. Harris and invited us to sit. Why don't we start by talking about why you're here today? She said, her voice gentle but direct. I glanced at Sam, who nodded for me to go first. I took a deep breath, my hands twisting in my lap. I guess we're here because we've been struggling, I said. We've been married for 5 years, and for a while things felt good. But somewhere along the way, we stopped really connecting, and I let my doubts and fears get the better of me. I didn't talk to Sam about how I was feeling, and it all came to a head a few days ago. Dr. Harris nodded, her expression encouraging. And what happened then? I hesitated, glancing at Sam again. He gave me a small, reassuring nod. I said something I shouldn't have, I admitted. I told my sister I regretted marrying him. He overheard, and it hurt him. It hurt us. Sam's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Dr. Harris turned to him. How did that make you feel, Sam? He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me, he said. I knew things hadn't been perfect, but I didn't realize how far apart we'd grown. Hearing her say that, it made me question everything. whether she ever really wanted us. His words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt tears sting my eyes. I did, I said quickly. I do. Sam, I swear I never stopped loving you. I got lost in my own head, in my own fears. And I didn't know how to find my way back. Dr. Harris held up a hand, her voice calm but firm. This is a safe space, she said. It's okay to feel hurt, and it's okay to feel regret. What's important is that you're both here, willing to talk about it. The session continued, each of us taking turns to share our thoughts, our fears, and our hopes. It was hard. Harder than I'd expected. But it was also cathartic. For the first time in months, I felt like we were truly listening to each other. When the session ended, Dr. Harris gave us some homework to write letters to each other, expressing what we felt, but struggled to say out loud. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper in front of me, the weight of everything I wanted to say pressing down on me. Slowly, I began to write, my words pouring out in a messy, unfiltered stream. Sam, I began. I don't know where to start, but I know I need to say this. I love you. I've always loved you, even when I let my fears convince me otherwise. I've made mistakes, and I've hurt you. And for that, I'm so sorry. I want to be better. For you. For us. I don't know if I deserve your forgiveness, but I'm willing to fight for it. For us. When I finished, the page was filled with my handwriting, smudged in places where my tears had fallen. I folded it carefully and set it aside, my heart heavy, but hopeful. This wasn't going to be easy. Instead, I made coffee, the rich aroma filling the air as the early morning light filtered through the window. I heard Sam stir upstairs, his footsteps soft as he came down to join me. Morning, he said, his voice still thick with sleep. Morning, I replied, sliding a mug of coffee toward him. He sat across from me at the table, his eyes flickering to the folded paper sitting between us. Is that it? He asked. I nodded, my stomach tightening. Yeah, I wasn't sure if I should give it to you now or later. He took a sip of coffee, studying me over the rim of his mug. Why not now? I hesitated, then pushed the letter toward him. He picked it up carefully, as if it were something fragile, and unfolded it. I watched him as he read, his expression shifting subtly with every line. When he finished, he set the letter down and looked at me, his eyes soft but serious. Thank you for writing this, he said quietly. I meant every word, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, then stood and walked to the living room. For a moment, I thought he needed space, but then I saw him pick up his own folded letter from the coffee table. I wrote one too, he said, handing it to me. My heart raced as I unfolded, and the neat lines of his handwriting bringing tears to my eyes before I even started reading. Lena, it began. There are a million things I could say, but I think the most important one is this. I love you. I never stopped loving you, even when it felt like we were miles apart. I've been angry, hurt, and confused. But through it all, I've never doubted that I want us to work. I want to be better too. For you. For us. Whatever it takes, I'm willing to try. By the time I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face. I looked up at him, my vision blurred, and saw that his eyes were wet too. I don't deserve you, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. He shook, his head, his voice firm but kind. Don't say that. We both made mistakes, Lena. But we're here now, and that's what matters. I stood, closing the distance between us. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wrapped my arms around him, and he held me tightly in return. It wasn't a perfect moment. It was messy and raw, but it was real. That day, we decided to make time for each other in ways we hadn't before. We turned off our phones and spent the afternoon together, walking through the park and talking about everything and nothing. We laughed, hesitantly at first, then freely, as if rediscovering a language we'd almost forgotten. Later that evening, we cooked dinner together, something we hadn't done in ages. It was a simple meal, pasta and salad, but it felt monumental. "Remember the first time we tried cooking together?" Sam asked, a small smile playing on his lips. I laughed, shaking my head. How could I forget? We burned the chicken and set off the smoke alarm. "And we still ate it," he said, grinning. "Barely," I replied, grinning back. The memory was a small thing, but it felt like a bridge, a reminder of the good times we'd shared, and the ones we still had the chance to create. That night, as we lay in bed, I turned to him. "Do you think this is enough?" I asked, my voice tentative. He looked at me, his expression thoughtful. "I think it's a start," he said, "and sometimes that's all you need." I nodded, feeling a sense of calm I hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't a guarantee that everything would be okay, but it was something. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had a chance. The following weeks became a rhythm, awkward, imperfect, but undeniably ours. Therapy sessions with Dr. Harris became a regular part of our lives, each one peeling back a new layer of misunderstanding, resentment, and, most importantly, love that had been buried beneath it all. We weren't magically healed, far from it. There were days when the silence between us stretched too long, when one of us would say something that struck a nerve, and the old hurt would rise to the surface. But for every setback, there was a small step forward. A shared laugh, an honest conversation, a moment of vulnerability that reminded us both why we were trying. One evening, after a particularly intense therapy session, Sam and I sat on the fall porch together, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of the lavender bush near the steps. "You know what Dr. Harris said today about forgiveness?" Sam asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Yeah," I said, "that it's not about forgetting or excusing, but about letting go of the grip the hurt has on you." He nodded, his gaze distant. "I've been thinking about that a lot. About how I can forgive you. Not just for what you said, but for the things you didn't say. For the times I felt like you'd already given up on us." I swallowed hard, guilt flaring in my chest. "Sam, He held up a hand, stopping me gently. "Let me finish," he said. "I know it's not just about me forgiving you. I need to forgive myself too. For the times I wasn't present, for the times I let my own fears and stress push you away. It's a two-way street, Lena. And I'm starting to see that now." His words hit me harder than I expected, and I felt tears well up in my eyes. "I've been trying to figure out how to forgive myself too," I admitted. "For not trusting you enough to share how I was feeling, for letting my doubts fester instead of confronting them." He reached over, his hand covering mine. "We're learning," he said simply. And we were. Slowly, painfully, but surely, we were learning how to meet each other where we were, rather than where we thought we should be. The next day, Sam surprised me by suggesting we tackle a project together, redecorating the living room. It was something we'd talked about doing for years but had never gotten around to. As we moved furniture, painted walls, and picked out new decor, it felt like we were rebuilding more than just the space. We were rebuilding our partnership, piece by piece, decision by decision. "What do you think of this color?" Sam asked, holding up a swatch of deep green. I tilted my head, considering it. "It's bold," I said. He grinned. "So are we." I laughed, nodding. Okay, let's do it. By the time we finished, the room was unrecognizable, a vibrant, inviting space that felt like a reflection of the new beginning we were creating. That night, as we sat on the couch admiring our work, Sam turned to me with a small smile. Do you remember the first time we talked about what we wanted our home to feel like? I nodded, the memory bringing a smile to my face. Warm, welcoming, and full of life, I said. Exactly, he said. I think we're finally getting there. His words stayed with me long after we went to bed, a reminder of how far we'd come and how much further we had to go. The next week, Dr. Harris asked us to revisit a topic we'd danced around for weeks. The moment Sam overheard me telling my sister I regretted marrying him. I think we need to unpack this fully, she said, her tone gentle but firm. Not just what was said, but what it meant for each of you. I glanced at Sam, who gave me a small nod. I think, for me, it was about feeling trapped. I said, my voice trembling slightly. Not by Sam, but by my own fears and expectations. I felt like I had failed, not just as a wife, but as a partner. And instead of confronting those feelings, I let them poison the way I saw our relationship. Dr. Harris turned to Sam. And for you? He exhaled deeply, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. It felt like a betrayal, he admitted. Not because she had doubts, we all have doubts, but because I felt like she didn't trust me enough to share them with me, like she didn't believe I could handle the truth. His words stung, but they were fair. I didn't trust you, I said, my voice breaking. Not because of anything you did, but because I didn't trust myself. I didn't believe I was enough, and I projected that onto you. Dr. Harris nodded, her expression thoughtful. It sounds like both of you were operating from a place of fear, she said. Fear of being vulnerable, fear of being hurt, fear of not being enough. The key now is learning to replace that fear with trust. Trust. It was such a simple word, but it carried so much weight. That evening, Sam and I sat on the porch again, the stars twinkling above us. Do you think we'll ever get there? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me, his gaze steady. I think we're already on our way, he said. And for the first time, I believed him. If this story touched you, let me know your thoughts. Have you ever faced a moment that tested your relationship in ways you never expected? Share your journey. I'd love to hear it. Thank you for taking the time to listen to mine.